Well, the pace of consumer inflation is under the spotlight today. We said earlier, CPI ticked up in December. Well, with me, Thabi Nkosi, senior economist at Agri-SA. She joins us now. Thabi, thanks indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
Well, it's interesting. This was the quickest pace at which inflation rose in the past year. What is that telling us?
It certainly tells us that we're in for some hard times, but it certainly was not to our surprise. The rand has depreciated quite substantially. We've seen huge increases in the prices of food. And of course, I think it's just going to get worse. We're likely to see a significant tariff increase from Eskom. We're likely to see further petrol price increases. So I think this is just the beginning.
Yeah, I took a look at some of the stats within the CPI. Let's look at food inflation. 4.8% in November, it jumps to 5.9% in December. Going forward, just given the effect of drought on crops, given the weakening rand, I suppose for food inflation, the worst is yet to come.
Oh, absolutely. We're likely to see food inflation in excess of 10% towards the middle of this year, and it's really going to keep rising until about mid-next year. We're hoping to see some reprieve thereafter should we get good rains. Of course, there are some indications currently that this drought might continue long after what we had expected. So we might be in for some hard times well into the future.
You look at what Kasati is saying at the moment. It wants the Competition Commission to investigate possible maize price fixing in the market. Farmers are saying, hang on, it's the drought. It's got nothing to do with fixing. How much of an influence is the drought really affecting planting and affecting the chain?
Well, certainly you don't want to preempt the investigations of the Competition Commission. There's always room for, unethical practices, but certainly from what we have seen is that maize farmers have really planted half of their crop. Commodity prices will respond in response. JSE responds to supply and demand, and certainly supply is down to historical levels. So these high prices are not anything that we had not expected. So we had expected that would be some significant increases. As to whether there might be some practices that are unethical in terms of what the traders are doing, that remains to be seen, and I think that investigation should be left to unfold.
You look at the entire scenario and the outlook. What is the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee really digesting about these figures now?
I think they're between a rock and a hard place at this point. They had indicated in their last monetary policy statement that they were keeping a close eye on the inflationary pressures, food prices being among those, and of course currently looking at what the Fed is doing in terms of hiking its rates and the kind of investment that we're trying to attract into South Africa. I think the Reserve Bank will have no choice but to hike rates in the upcoming meeting. And this, of course, does not bode well for those consumers who need to repay loans. So I think it's definitely going to be a vicious cycle, but I think the Reserve Bank needs to do what it needs to do to protect investment in our country. Yeah,
at the same time, many of us waking up this morning and looking at the IMF's revising its growth forecast or its outlook for South Africa. It says for this year 0.7% growth. You weren't surprised with that forecast?
Absolutely not. I mean, after what National Treasury had released in their last midterm budget speech, a lot of revisions were made by economists to their forecasts, largely in response to what happened in December or the beginning of this year in terms of what the rand had done. So certainly a lot of things are not looking well. We've had some challenges on Eskom's side, as I mentioned earlier. So a lot of economists were actually looking around 0.5% growth. Some economists were even talking about recession. So I think certainly what the IMF has done is certainly not any surprise, and I think further revisions downwards can be expected, unfortunately.
All right, you speak about expectations. Final question, the budget next month. Minister Pravin Gordhan, what would you think you're going to see, and what would you like to see from the budget?
We'd like to see a sensible budget. I think there's a lot of pressure on the finance minister at this point with the Fees Must Fall campaign. There are calls from farmers for drought relief, but we need to understand that we are still fiscally constrained since Minister Nene had made his speech. So I think we're looking for a responsible budget and a fine, delicate balancing act. I think investors will have a close eye on what the Minister of Finance had said, and I think we're really expecting some prudency amidst all the challenges that we're still facing.
Oh, fair enough. Thabi Nkosi, senior economist at Agri-SA. Thanks indeed for coming in.
Thank you.